I shouldn't have taken that job. The barn still smelled like warm hay and leather when I first realized what was happening. Dust floated through the sunlight coming in from the open doors, and somewhere behind me a loose metal latch kept tapping against the stall gate. Tap. 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 That was the moment I understood how dangerous it was to be there. Because Rowan Hale was standing 10 feet away from me, watching. She owned the ranch. She was 13 years older than me. And everyone in town had already warned me about her before I even stepped through that barn door. They said she ruined people. They said 15 years ago she'd been caught behind the church barn kissing another woman, and the town had never forgotten it. They said that scandal followed her everywhere, even after she married, even after her husband died 3 years ago. And now she was my boss. Which meant if anyone saw the way she looked at me sometimes, the way her eyes lingered a second too long, the gossip in this town would explode all over again. I could lose my job. She could lose everything she'd rebuilt after her husband died. And the worst part? I think we both knew it. Because Rowan Hale had already given me one very clear rule the first morning I arrived at her ranch. Stay away from my horse. Her stallion was massive. Black. Dangerous. The kind of animal no one in Dry Creek dared ride except her. But the truth is, the horse was never the real danger. She was. And the moment she stepped behind me the first time to show me how to sit the saddle right, her hands steady on my waist while the stallion shifted under us, I felt her breath against my neck. Warm. Close. Too close. That was the moment I knew this job was a mistake. And if I didn't walk away soon, I wasn't going to be strong enough to stop what was coming next. Because Rowan Hale wasn't looking at me like a ranch hand. She was looking at me like the kind of trouble that could burn a whole town down. And somehow, I was already leaning toward the fire. I should have turned around the second I saw the church steeple. I should have kept driving. I should have known a town that small could smell trouble before I even stepped out of my truck. Dry Creek, Oklahoma looked like the kind of place people called charming when they didn't have to live there. One main road. One diner with sun-faded curtains. One feed store with a Coke machine sweating by the door. A brick church planted near the center of town like everything else had been built around it on purpose. White paint. Narrow windows. A bell tower that seemed too proud for a place where half the buildings looked one hard storm away from giving up. I rolled through town with my hand tight on the steering wheel, and my whole life packed into the back of a rusted Ford that had no business making it across state lines. 2 duffel bags. 1 cracked suitcase. A cardboard box of books I kept telling myself I was still going to read. And $84 folded inside my wallet. That was what I had left after I left Amarillo. No. Not left. Ran. There's a difference. Left sounds clean. Planned. Like a woman with options making a sensible choice. Ran sounds like what it was. My mother's boyfriend standing too close in the kitchen again. His hand on the counter beside mine. His voice low like we were sharing something. My mother pretending not to notice because pretending was easier than changing her life. Rent overdue. My phone bill late. A motel job that had cut my hours and then cut me loose like they were doing me a favor. So I drove north because a girl I barely knew from high school had once told me her aunt lived near the Oklahoma border, and that there were always ranches looking for extra help. She'd been wrong about the border. But she'd been right about the ranches. At least that was what I told myself when I pulled into the gravel lot outside the diner, and sat there with the engine ticking hot under the hood. My reflection in the windshield looked tired. 23 and already tired in the kind of way makeup couldn't hide even if I'd been wearing any. My hair was pulled back, but pieces had come loose around my face from the drive. I had dust on my jeans. Sweat at the base of my neck. That hollow feeling under my ribs that came whenever I had to walk into a place and ask for work from people who already had enough reasons to say no. I stayed in the truck for another 10 seconds. Maybe 20. Then I grabbed my bag, got out, and crossed the lot. The bell over the diner door gave a sharp little jolt when I pushed inside. Cool air hit my skin. Coffee. Fried onions. Lemon cleaner. The place was half full, and every face turned just a little when I walked in. Not fully. Not rude. Just enough to remind me I wasn't from there. I slid onto a stool at the counter, and the waitress came over with a pot of coffee in one hand, and a look that told me she could size up a stranger before the first sentence was over. "What can I get you, honey? Coffee's fine." She poured. "Passing through?" "No." That made her look at me again. I wrapped both hands around the mug even though it was too hot to hold for long. "Actually, I'm looking for work." That got the man 2 stools down to lift his head from his eggs. The waitress topped off someone else's cup, then came back to me. What kind of work? Anything. Cleaning. Stocking. Stables if someone needs help. I can cook a little. I can lift feed bags. I'm not picky. She set the pot down. You know horses. Enough not to stand behind one. A few people smiled at that. Small. Careful. The man with the eggs finally turned toward me. He had a face like dried leather and a seed cap with a John Deere logo so faded it looked historical. You won't find much in town unless old man Garrison's short a cashier again, he said. Feed store, maybe. But if you're talking steady work? He took a bite, chewed, then added, Hale Ranch is usually needing somebody. The waitress gave him a look. What? He said. She looked back at me. You don't want Hale Ranch. I took a sip of coffee and tried not to let my nerves show. Why not? Nobody stays long. That because the work's hard? The waitress wiped down the counter with a folded towel. Work's work. The man with the cap snorted. That's one way to say it. I looked between them. So what's the real reason? The waitress hesitated. People always do that right before gossip. There's this tiny pause where they get to pretend they're being decent. Then she leaned one hip against the counter. Rowan Hale runs the place now. The widow, the man muttered. Her husband died 3 years ago, the waitress said, as if correcting his tone instead of his words. Then quieter, she keeps to herself. That's supposed to scare me? No, the waitress said. The town should. I stared at her. She looked at my face, maybe decided I was too tired to waste a good warning on, and lowered her voice. Dry Creek remembers things. Rowan Hale more than most. The man 2 stools down set his fork down. You telling her or not? The waitress gave in with a tired sigh. When she was younger, before she got married, there was some mess, some scandal. You know how towns are. I did. That didn't mean I liked the shape of her voice when she said it. What kind of scandal? She folded the towel once. The kind folks don't forget. The man answered for her. She got caught kissing a girl behind the church barn when she was 21. The words landed hard and plain between us. Nobody in the diner reacted like it was shocking. That was the part that told me how old the story really was. The shock had worn off years ago. All that was left now was ownership. The town had taken the story and polished it smooth by repeating it enough times. I looked toward the church through the front window. White paint. Bell tower. Clean lines. The kind of building that made people feel righteous just standing near it. And that still matters? I asked. The waitress gave me a look that was almost pity. In Dry Creek? The man laughed into his coffee. I should have kept my expression flat. Neutral. Practical. But something in me went sharp instead. Maybe because I knew what it was to have a room decide something about you before you got a chance to tell your own story. Maybe because the fact that they were still chewing on something that happened 15 years ago told me exactly what kind of place I'd driven into. Maybe because I had spent too much of my life watching women survive by shrinking. What happened after? I asked. The waitress shrugged. She disappeared for a while. Came back married. Married well, too. Ethan Hale had land. Name. People stopped saying much after that. Did they stop believing it? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I took another sip of coffee. It had already gone a little bitter. The waitress straightened. Look, honey, I'm just telling you what everyone knows. Women don't usually go work there unless they have to. I almost smiled. That was the problem. I had to. The motel I'd spent the night in had one more night on the money I had left. After that, I'd be sleeping in my truck if it held together and in a ditch if it didn't. What if I'm not scared of a widow with a bad reputation? I asked. The man with the cap said, Then maybe you don't know enough yet. Maybe I should have heard the weight in that. Maybe I did. But there are moments in life when the cliff is obvious, and you still step closer because hunger makes every warning sound abstract. I finished my coffee, asked for directions, and wrote them down on a paper napkin. Hale Ranch sat just outside town on the west side, past a line of cottonwoods and 2 rusted gates that looked older than the road. I drove there with the windows down because my truck's air conditioning only worked when it felt generous, which wasn't often, and the late morning heat kept pressing in through the windshield like a hand. The farther I got from town, the wider everything opened. Flat stretches of land broken by fencing. Grazing pasture. A pond gone thin around the edges. Wind moving low through the grass. By the time I saw the ranch house in the distance, my shoulders had started to unclench. That was the thing about open land. It lies to you beautifully. Makes you think there's room to breathe just because there's room to look. The house was bigger than I expected, but not fancy. White siding. Deep porch. A swing at one end that wasn't moving. Barn off to the side. Corrals. A line of trucks near the equipment shed. The place looked tapped but not polished. Hard-working. The kind of property that made sense only if someone was paying attention every day. I parked near the barn and cut the engine. The silence after a long drive always feels louder than it should. Then the ranch filled in around it. A horse snorting somewhere nearby. The metallic clink of a chain. Wind moving through a loose sheet of tin. My boots hit the dirt and dust rose around them. I could have called out. Instead, I followed the sounds toward the barn. Inside, the air changed. Cooler. Shadowed. Full of hay dust and leather and that warm animal smell that always feels more honest than people do. Light fell in long gold strips through the slats high in the wall. I could hear movement deeper in, hooves shifting, the soft rustle of straw, a bucket being set down. Then I saw her. She was at the far end of the aisle with one hand on a stall door, saying something low to a horse I couldn't see. She wore jeans, work boots, and a faded dark shirt with the sleeves pushed up to her forearms. No jewelry except what looked like a plain band of silver on one hand. Her hair was pulled back, but not carefully. The kind of knot done for work, not mirrors. A few loose strands stuck to the back of her neck where the heat had found her. She turned when she heard me. I knew before she spoke that she was Rowan Hale. Some women announce themselves with beauty. She didn't. She announced herself with control. Not cold exactly. Not at first glance. Just contained in a way that made the whole barn feel arranged around her. Tall. Broad-shouldered in that strong ranch-bred way. Face all clean lines and sun-touched skin and eyes that landed on me once and stayed there just long enough to make me aware of every inch of myself. Not in a flirtatious way. Not then. More like she was measuring whether I belonged in her space. I'd met men who looked at women like that. Owners. Bosses. Men who thought the world had been set on a table for them to sort into useful and useless. This wasn't that. This felt worse somehow. Because her attention didn't reduce me. It sharpened me. "You lost?" she asked. Her voice was lower than I expected. Calm. Even. No extra softness. I stepped closer into the light. "No, I came about work." For a second she said nothing. Behind her, a horse stamped once inside the stall. "Who sent you?" The waitress at the diner. And half the people listening. That almost changed her face. Almost. "What kind of work are you looking for?" "The kind that pays." That did change her face, though only around the edges. Not a smile. Something smaller. Like she appreciated the answer despite herself. "I can clean stalls," I said. "Mend fence. Feed. Lift. I learned fast. You know ranch work? Enough to be useful." "Useful and trained aren't the same thing." "No," I said. "But I'm still standing here." Her gaze held mine another second. Then she stepped aside and latched the stall behind her. Up close, she was more striking than beautiful. Not polished. Not easy. There was a scar near one eyebrow, faint and old. Sunlines at the corners of her eyes. Nothing soft about her except her mouth, and even that looked like it had learned not to give much away. I hated that I noticed. I hated it more that she noticed me noticing. "Name?" she asked. "Ruby Walker." She nodded once, like she was filing it somewhere she didn't trust yet. "I need help in the barn. Temporary to start. Temporary works. Pays weekly. Good. You'd be up before sunrise." I've had worse. Most people say that before they start. I should have left it there. I should have taken the job, thanked her, and kept every part of myself locked where it belonged. But there was something in the air between us already. Not attraction. Not yet, at least not in any way I was willing to name. Just pressure. The feeling of standing near a storm too far away to hear but close enough to feel in your teeth. Then a horse in the next stall pushed its head over the half door. Black. Massive. Beautiful in a way that didn't care if you survived it. His coat caught what little light there was and turned it blue-black. One ear flicked toward me. Then both. He watched me with that unnervingly direct animal focus that makes you feel like the thing being studied. I took one step toward him without thinking. Rowan's voice changed instantly. Don't. I stopped. She was beside me before I fully understood she'd moved. Not touching. Just there. Fast enough that the air around me shifted. That's Tempest, she said. The horse blew warm breath through his nostrils and kept staring. I looked at Rowan. He yours? Yes. He's beautiful. He's not friendly. I didn't say he was. Her eyes moved from my face to the horse and back again. There was that measuring look again. Careful. Hard to read. Then she said the line that would stay with me long after the first day was over. Stay away from my horse. Simple. Flat. Not rude. And somehow the words landed with more force than if she'd snapped them. I should have nodded and looked away. Instead I asked, he kick or bite? He does what he wants? That like owner, or is that just the horse? Silence. 1 beat. 2. Then Rowan looked at me in a way that made my skin register the exact temperature of the air. Not anger. Something else. Something far more dangerous because it was quieter. You ask that many questions, she said. You won't last long here. Depends on the answers. Her mouth shifted again. Almost smile. Then she stepped back, and whatever had just passed between us thinned enough for me to breathe normally. Work starts tomorrow, she said. 6 a.m., don't be late. That it? No. She pointed toward a room off the side of the barn. Supplies are in there. Gloves on the shelf. Stalls on the east side need mucking today if you want to start earning. Today. I hadn't expected that, but maybe I should have. People like Rowan Hale didn't hire stories. They hired hands. I nodded. Fine. She turned to go, then stopped. Ruby. The way she said my name the first time did something odd to the space between my shoulders. Low. Direct. Like she already knew how it sounded in her mouth. Yes, stay out of town gossip. It won't help you here. There it was. Not the whole warning. Just enough of one. I wanted to ask whether she meant for my sake or hers. I didn't. Instead I said, I didn't come here for gossip. She held my gaze another second, then walked away. I watched her until she disappeared through the far barn door, and only when the light swallowed her did I realize I'd forgotten to breathe properly for most of that exchange. Too close. That came out of nowhere. Or maybe not nowhere. Maybe from the simple fact that she had crossed the aisle too fast when I stepped toward that horse. Maybe from how quickly my body had catalogued the details of her without permission. The faded cotton of her shirt. The rough line of her hands. The steadiness in her voice. The way she seemed to carry some old invisible brace around her life, like one wrong movement, and everything private might spill out. Too close for a boss. Too close for a stranger. Too close for a woman in a town like this. I spent the next 4 hours shoveling stalls, sweating through my shirt, and reminding myself exactly why I was there. Money. That was all. Money and survival, and one decent chance to hold a piece of my life still long enough to build something that didn't depend on somebody else. Mercy. The work was hard in the honest way I preferred. Heavy. Dirty. Repetitive enough that my mind could drift without getting lost. The horses on the east side were calmer than Tempest. One chestnut mare kept nudging my shoulder whenever I passed. A gray gelding pinned his ears every time I got near his feed. By noon, my arms were shaking. By 1, I'd stopped caring. Somewhere outside, trucks came and went. 2 men unloaded fencing supplies. Nobody bothered me much. They looked at me once, recognized I was working, and left it alone. At one point, my phone vibrated in my back pocket. I ignored it the first time. The second time, I stepped outside into the strip of shade behind the barn and checked the screen. My mother. 2 missed calls. 1 text. You could at least answer me. I stared at the words until the heat in the screen blurred. Then I locked the phone and shoved it back into my pocket without replying. There are people who can reach into your body from 2 states away. Not literally. Worse. They can do it with 1 sentence. 1 name on a screen. 1 reminder that you were raised inside a house where love always came tangled with obligation and silence and guilt. I leaned my head back against the barn wall and shut my eyes. The wood was hot at my shoulders. Some things don't break all at once. They were thin in the same place until one day your whole life gives way under a touch that didn't even look that hard. I don't know why that thought came then. Maybe because I was exhausted. Maybe because I was standing behind a barn in a town full of judgment, after taking a job from a woman everyone still talked about in lowered voices. Maybe because I was trying very hard not to think about the way Rowan had looked at me when I answered back. When I opened my eyes, she was 20 feet away. I didn't hear her come around the corner. She had a ledger in one hand and a pencil tucked behind one ear. She stopped when she saw me there. I straightened too fast. For a second, neither of us said anything. That was the first still moment between us. Small. Barely anything. But it stayed with me. Wind moved the grass beyond the corral. Somewhere, metal knocked softly against metal. And she looked at me like she'd caught me doing more than standing there alone. "You planning to finish those stalls?" she asked. I needed a minute. Her eyes flicked to my face. "You sick?" "No, you look pale." "I'm fine." The lie came out too quickly. She heard it. I knew she heard it because her gaze sharpened, and for one brief, unsettling second, concern moved under all that control. "He gets mean out here," she said. "Drink more water," I said. "I'm fine." The words came out sharper than I intended. Something in her expression closed immediately. "There's cold water in the tack room," she said. "Use it." Then she started to turn away. I should have let her go. Instead, I heard myself say, "Why does everyone act like working for you is some kind of curse?" She stopped. Didn't turn back right away. When she finally did, there was no softness left in her face at all. "What did they tell you?" The smart answer would have been nothing. The smarter answer would have been that it wasn't my business. But the truth was sitting between us already, and I'd never been good at pretending I hadn't seen something once I had. "They told me enough." A long pause. Then, "And you still took the job?" "I needed one." "That's not what I asked." There are certain moments when a person's voice can make the whole world feel narrower. Hers did. I looked at her, at the set of her shoulders and the stillness in her hands, and understood something I hadn't fully understood in the diner. This wasn't just about gossip. This was about endurance. A whole town had been taking little bites out of her life for 15 years, and she'd learned how to stand still while they did it. "Yes," I said finally. "I still took the job." "Why?" "Because I had nowhere else to go. Because I was tired of letting other people's fear decide where I was allowed to stand. Because something stubborn in me reacted badly to the idea of a woman being turned into a warning sign just for being seen wanting the wrong thing. Because when she looked at me, I didn't feel diminished. I felt noticed. I didn't say any of that. I said the version that cost less. Because I don't care who you kissed when you were 21. The air between us changed. Not dramatically. No thunder. No gasp. Nothing theatrical. Just a deep, almost invisible shift, like a fence wire pulled tighter. Rowan's face gave me nothing for a second. Then less than nothing. I saw the exact moment she put every wall she had back in place. "You should," she said quietly. It wasn't a threat. That was what made it sit so badly in my chest. It sounded like experience. She turned and walked away before I could answer. I finished the stalls. I drank the water. I kept my eyes on my work and my thoughts off her as much as I could, which turned out to be less than I wanted, and more than I liked. By late afternoon, the sun had gone harder and flatter. Everything outside looked bleached around the edges. One of the ranch hands, Louise, I learned later, showed me where extra buckets were kept and told me I'd done fine for a first day. He said it casually, without the curiosity I'd been bracing for. I appreciated that. Rowan didn't come back into the barn while I was there. I told myself I was relieved. That was almost true. When I was finally done, I washed my hands at the outdoor spigot and watched muddy water run over my wrists and knuckles into the dirt. My whole body ached. Good ache. Earned ache. Better than the ache of waiting for something bad to happen because it usually did. I found Rowan on the porch of the main house at dusk, writing in that same ledger with one boot braced on the step below her. The sky behind the fields had started turning amber at the edges. Crickets were waking up. The porch swing still wasn't moving. She looked up when I came to the bottom of the steps. For one irrational second, I was aware of everything at once. The sweat dried at the small of my back. The dust on my jeans. The way the last light hit her throat. Ridiculous. I pushed it down. "You still want me tomorrow?" I asked. "I paid you for today. That wasn't the question." Her mouth twitched faintly. 6 a.m. I nodded. Where am I staying? That caught something in her face. Not surprised that I needed a place. Surprised that I'd asked directly. I know you said temporary, I added, but I'm not local. I know, you know. Your plates are in Oklahoma. Right. Of course you notice things like that. There's a bunkhouse behind the equipment shed, she said. Small, but clean enough. You can stay a week. After that, we'll see if you're useful. That your idea of hospitality? It's my idea of honesty. I should have laughed. Instead, I said, good. I like honesty. The second the words left my mouth, I felt the shape of them between us. Too pointed. Too personal. Maybe she felt it too, because she went still in that controlled way again, pencil resting against the edge of the ledger, eyes on mine a second longer than they needed to be. Then she said, most people don't. I don't know what made me answer the way I did. Fatigue, maybe. Heat. The accumulated strain of pretending to be less affected than I was. Or maybe just the simple fact that some people invite truth by carrying so much of the opposite. I do, I said. At least I know what to do with it. She looked at me then. Really looked. No ranch owner. No employer. No town legend. Just a woman standing on a porch at dusk with a day's work still on her skin and something old and guarded sitting behind her eyes like it had built a home there. For 5 or 6 seconds nothing happened. No speech. No movement. Just the sound of insects in the grass and the ledger page lifting slightly in the breeze under her hand. That was the second still moment. Heavier than the first. And somewhere inside it, something in me slipped. Not into desire. Not yet. Into awareness. The kind that can change the direction of a whole life before your mind catches up enough to call it by name. Then the screen door opened behind her, and the moment broke. An older man stepped halfway out, saw me, saw Rowan, and hesitated. Thence cruise done for the day. Rowan didn't look away from me right away. All right. He nodded once and disappeared back inside. I exhaled. I hadn't realized I'd stopped breathing properly. Rowan closed the ledger. Bunkhouse keys on the hook by the side door. First one on the left. Thanks. I turned to go. Ruby. I stopped and looked back. She had one hand on the porch rail now. The other still holding that pencil. Tempest is stalled on the north side, she said. You don't go in there unless I tell you to. Don't feed him. Don't try to pet him. Don't think you know him because he looks calm through a gate. There it was again. Stay away from my horse. Only this time it sounded like more than instruction. It sounded like a rule with history under it. Maybe even pain. I nodded once. Got it. But I didn't move right away. Neither did she. And because, apparently, I had already lost the instinct to leave dangerous silences alone, I asked, does he hurt everybody? Or just people who get too close? Her expression changed so slightly I might have imagined it. Then she said, very quietly, that depends on why they came near him. I felt that answer in my pulse before I understood it with my head. The bunkhouse was exactly what she'd promised. Small. Clean enough. One narrow bed. One dresser missing a handle. A tiny bathroom with a mirror that leaned forward from the wall like it had given up. I dropped my duffel by the bed, sat down, and listened to the silence. Real silence is never empty. It has layers. Back in the distance. Cicadas grinding outside. Water pipes settling in the wall. And under all of it, the strange new hum inside me that I didn't want to examine too closely. I washed off the day, changed into a clean shirt, and sat on the edge of the bed with my phone in my hand until the screen dimmed. My mother had texted again. Where are you? I didn't answer that either. Instead, I opened the cracked little window over the dresser and let the evening air in. It smelled like dry grass and cooling dirt and something faintly sweet from the hay barn. Beyond the bunkhouse, I could see part of the pasture silvering under the first rise of moonlight. There's a particular loneliness in arriving somewhere new at night. No one waiting. No one asking how the day went. Just your own breathing in a strange room, and the knowledge that if you vanished before morning, the world would need a little while to notice. I lay back on the bed without taking off my boots. I thought about the diner. About the church. About the way people had said Rowan's name like they were passing a dish they didn't want but couldn't stop tasting. Then I thought about her face when I'd said I didn't care who she kissed when she was 21. You should. Why had she said it like that? Why had it sounded less like shame and more like warning? And why did I keep hearing her voice in my head at all? I turned onto my side and stared at the wall. Too close. The phrase came back, stranger now because it wasn't attached to any single moment. It had become a feeling. A line I could sense without seeing. A place my body already knew before my mind did. Too close to trouble. Too close to a woman with a history in a town that fed on history. Too close to noticing the wrong things. I should have slept. Instead, I got up after 20 minutes, too restless to stay still, and stepped outside. The ranch had changed under the moon. Softer at the edges. The house dark except for one lamp in an upstairs window. The barn standing long and quiet against the field. I wrapped my arms around myself against the cooling air and walked a little without deciding to. Past the shed. Past the water trough. Toward the fence line near the north side of the barn. I wasn't going to Tempest's stall. At least that's what I told myself. Then a sound reached me. Low. A horse shifting weight. A soft huff through the dark. I stopped near the fence and looked toward the barn. One light was on inside. Dim. Golden. And through the open side door I could see Rowan. Not clearly at first. Just the shape of her moving inside the stall with the black horse. One hand on his neck. Her head bent slightly as she said something I couldn't hear. Tempest stood perfectly still for her. Massive and quiet and utterly different from the dangerous creature everyone had described. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough to realize I should go back. Long enough to understand that some of the loneliness I'd been carrying all day had shifted into something more complicated. Long enough for Rowan to turn. Even at that distance, I knew when she saw me. She didn't wave. Didn't call out. Didn't move away either. She just stood there with one hand still resting on the black stallion's neck and looked straight toward the fence where I'd frozen like a thief caught in moonlight. The whole ranch seemed to hold its breath. I should have walked away first. I didn't. Neither did she. And standing there in the dark, with the church and town somewhere beyond the fields, and all that old gossip sleeping in other people's mouths, I understood one thing with terrifying clarity. This was no longer just a job. I woke before the alarm because I'd never really fallen all the way asleep. For a few seconds I forgot where I was. Then I heard the faint creak of the bunkhouse settling, the low wind moving past the screen, and somewhere outside, a horse calling once into the dark. Everything came back at once. The ranch. The town. Rowan standing in that wash of barn light with one hand on Tempest's neck and her eyes on me like she'd known, somehow, that I would come too close even when I had nowhere to be. I sat up and rubbed the sleep from my face. The room was still blue with early morning. My phone said 4:48. Too early. Not early enough. I pulled on yesterday's jeans, a clean shirt, and my boots, then twisted my hair back while standing in front of the crooked mirror over the dresser. I looked like exactly what I was. A girl with no backup plan trying to look steadier than she felt. Outside, dawn hadn't broken yet, but the ranch was already awake. That surprised me, though it shouldn't have. Some places don't wait for daylight to become themselves. They just rise out of the dark already moving. A truck engine turned over near the equipment shed. Metal clanged softly somewhere beyond the corrals. The air was cold enough to tighten my skin, and it carried that dry, clean smell of dirt and hay and horses before the day's heat could roughen it. I crossed toward the barn with my hands tucked under my arms for warmth. The sky was only beginning to pale at the edges. The kind of gray-blue morning that makes everything seem briefly possible because the world hasn't fully chosen a shape yet. Inside the barn, the shadows were thinner than they'd been the day before. I found the tack room by memory, grabbed gloves, and started on the feed buckets without being told. It felt easier that way. Better to move first. Better to keep my mind on weight and routine and simple tasks instead of the fact that my pulse had started acting strangely the second I stepped under that roof. I heard her before I saw her. Footsteps. Measured. Unhurried. Then her voice behind me. "You're early." I turned too fast, nearly knocking a scoop out of the grain bin. "You're watching the clock already." Her gaze dropped briefly to the mess I almost made, then came back to my face. "You always talk before coffee. I haven't had any yet." That explains some of it. The remark was dry enough that I couldn't tell if she was teasing me or warning me. With Rowan, I was beginning to understand. The line between the two might not be as wide as most people needed it to be. She looked different in the morning light. Same jeans, different shirt. Dark green this time, sleeves rolled up again. a thermal layer underneath where the cold still hadn't let go of the air. Her hair was down for once, loose over one shoulder, not brushed into anything careful. It should have made her seem softer. It didn't. It made her look more private, which somehow made her harder to look away from. I reached for another scoop of feed just so my hands had something to do. What needs doing first? She stepped into the tack room doorway and crossed one arm over her middle, not touching anything, just watching me work for a moment before answering. East side stalls. Then water troughs. Lewis is out with the south fence crew. If you finish before 8, I'll put you on tack cleaning. Ambitious of you. It's not ambition if I'm only asking for my money's worth. There it was again. Her way of keeping every exchange balanced on the edge of something. Nothing warm enough to trust. Nothing cold enough to dismiss. I lifted a bucket. You always this charming before sunrise? She reached past me then, taking a coiled lead rope off the peg by the door. She didn't touch me, but she came close enough that the air changed. That close, I could smell her. Soap, leather, and something sharp and clean underneath it all, like cold morning wind caught in cotton. My grip tightened on the bucket handle. Too close. Thought moved through me so quickly I almost felt embarrassed by it. She didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did, and chose not to show it. Charming costs extra, she said. Then she walked out. I stood there a second longer than I should have, staring at the doorway she'd just passed through. My body had reacted before my thoughts had caught up. Heat, low in my stomach. Pulse sudden and stupid. That small, humiliating awareness of skin that only ever seemed to happen when you wanted very badly not to want anything at all. I picked up the second bucket and told myself to get over it. Work helped. For a while. The rhythm of the barn settled around me faster on the second morning. Scoop, pour latch, move. Horses shifting in their stalls. The slap of feed against rubber buckets. Dust rising in pale shafts where the first real light began slipping through the boards. My breathing found a pattern. My shoulders did too. Outside, the ranch kept moving. Engines. Voices. The bark of a dog from somewhere near the house. Once, I heard a burst of laughter from 2 men hauling fencing posts. Life going on exactly as if my insides weren't doing anything unusual at all. That helped too. Real life always has a way of insulting whatever private drama your body is trying to stage. I was carrying a water bucket down the aisle when I saw Tempest, before he saw me. North side. His stall door was open but only halfway. He stood just inside the shadow with one hind leg cocked slightly, black coat absorbing the light instead of reflecting it. Huge. Still. Listening to something I couldn't hear. I stopped without meaning to. He turned his head. For a second, the whole barn narrowed to that one stall. I remembered Rowan's voice from the day before. Don't feed him. Don't try to pet him. Don't think you know him because he looks calm through a gate. Fair enough. I kept my distance. That Tempest did something strange then. He stepped forward. Slow. Curious. Reached his head over the half door and looked straight at me. I stayed still. Hey, I said softly, before I could stop myself. His ears flicked. He lowered his head half an inch. And from behind me, very quietly, I told you to stay away from him. Every muscle in my back tightened. I turned and found Rowan at the end of the aisle, carrying a saddle in one hand as if it weighed nothing. I am away from him, I said. Technically. She came closer, set the saddle on a stand, then looked from me to the horse, and back again. Tempest remained calm. That was the unsettling part. Rowan noticed it too. I knew she did because something in her face sharpened, not with anger, but with attention. Careful attention. The kind that made me feel like I'd accidentally stepped into the center of a conversation no one had meant to start. He doesn't do that, she said. Do what? Take an interest. I looked at Tempest. Maybe he's judging me. He'd probably be right. I smiled before I meant to. Her gaze caught the smile. Held it a beat too long. Then she looked away first. That should not have mattered. It did. She moved past me into the stall with a kind of easy authority that made the huge horse seem not small, but willing. Tempest shifted once, and let her come close. She ran a hand down his neck, checking something at the shoulder, her body turned half away from me. You right? She asked. The question landed oddly because it came out so casual. A little, I said. Not well. How little? I won't fall off on purpose. That's not reassuring. I leaned the bucket down by the wall. What's with the interrogation? You planning to put me on horse duty? No, she. She said it too quickly. Then, after a beat, not yet. I should have left it there. But the image rose in my mind before I could stop it. Rowan on horseback at sunrise. All that control turned fluid, physical, impossible not to watch. I hated that my body supplied details I hadn't even seen yet. So that's a maybe, I said. She turned her head then, looking at me over Tempest's back. A long look. Not unfriendly. Not soft either. Just direct enough to make my mouth go dry. You ask questions like you think there aren't consequences, she said. And there it was. A charged line, low and plain, dropped between us like it had always belonged there. For one disorienting second, I wasn't sure if she still meant the horse. My pulse answered before my brain did. I folded my arms so she wouldn't see my hands. I ask questions because everyone else in this town seems allergic to a straight answer. That hasn't hurt you yet. The words should have sounded detached. They didn't. There was something under them. Something so small I could have denied it if I'd wanted to. Concern. Or warning. Maybe both. It has, I said, before I could make myself say something lighter. The barn went still around that sentence. Not literally. The ranch still breathed beyond us. Someone rolled a wheelbarrow outside. A truck door slammed in the distance. A horse on the east side kicked once against a stall wall. But inside that stall, inside that moment, something paused. Rowan's hand remained on Tempest's neck. She looked at me differently then. Not like a worker. Not like a problem. Like she'd just glimpsed the outline of something she hadn't expected me to be carrying. I should have looked away. I didn't. Neither did she. 5 seconds, maybe 6. Nothing moved. Then Tempest tossed his head once, breaking it. Rowan blinked and stepped back toward the stall door. Finish the troughs? That your way of changing the subject? That's my way of running a ranch. I almost said something reckless then. Something about her being the one who asked first. Something about how quickly she'd gone guarded the second. The conversation felt too real. Instead, I picked up the bucket. And as I passed her, she reached out, not to touch me. Not quite, just to stop the stall door from swinging wider, and her knuckles brushed the back of my wrist. Barely anything. A glancing touch. Still enough to send a clean, bright line of heat all the way up my arm. I kept walking. That was the first touch that changed the room. Maybe not for both of us. For me, definitely. The rest of the morning became impossible in the quietest possible way. Nothing dramatic happened. Nobody caught us in some compromising position, because there wasn't one. No one said anything openly dangerous. The ranch went on being a ranch. I cleaned tack until my fingers smelled like worn leather and saddle soap. I hauled water. I scrubbed bits and buckles. Luis asked if I'd worked cattle before, and I told him no. He laughed and said that was probably a mercy. One of the older mares tried to steal the rag from my back pocket and succeeded. Life kept happening. That was the problem. It made every charged second with Rowan feel more real, not less. Because tension is one thing in isolation. It's almost easier that way. But when it lives inside ordinary hours, inside feed buckets and harness oil and sunlight flattening across the yard, it becomes something harder to dismiss. At some point near noon, I found myself standing at the wash station rubbing down a bridle I'd already cleaned twice. My phone vibrated on the counter beside me. I didn't have to look to know it was my mother again. I looked anyway. 3 new texts. 1 from her. 2 from a number I knew belonged to him. I locked the phone immediately, but not fast enough. My chest had already tightened. My body remembered before my mind could defend itself. That old sensation. The room closing in. A voice too near. The sour, helpless anger of not being believed quickly enough, often enough to matter. I set the bridle down and gripped the edge of the wash table until the feeling passed. Or thinned. It never really passed. It just loosened enough to breathe around. You can throw the phone away, you know. I jerked my head up. Rowan was standing in the doorway again. I had no idea how long she'd been there. You spying on me now? I asked. She leaned one shoulder against the frame. Hard to spy when you're making a face like the world just insulted your mother. I let out something that wasn't quite a laugh. That's one way to put it. She glanced toward the phone. Bad news? Old news. Sometimes that's worse. I looked back down at the bridle. You always this conversational in the middle of the day? Only when someone looks like they might pass out or break something. I wasn't going to break anything. You look angry enough. I'm not angry. Then what are you? The question came soft. Too soft. That was what got me. If she'd pushed, I would have lied. If she'd pried, I would have shut down. But that quietness in her voice opened something in me before I had the sense to stop it. Tired, I said. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was true enough that I felt it in my bones the second I said it. Rowan didn't answer right away. She pushed off the doorway and crossed to the shelf behind me, reaching for a jar of leather conditioner. Again, she passed close. Again, she did not touch me. Again, my body reacted like it had started learning her without permission. She set the jar down beside the bridle. Go eat. I'm working. You've been working since before dawn. That was the idea. It wasn't. I frowned at her. What? The idea was for you to last a week. There was no smile on her face. There was something dangerously close to one in her voice. I stared at her for half a second too long. Then I said the first thing that came to mind. You worried about me, Rowan? Her expression changed so subtly, I might have missed it if I hadn't already been watching her too carefully. Not shock. Not offense. Just a stillness that seemed to travel through her body and settle somewhere deep. You're my employee, she said. Perfectly reasonable answer. I hated how disappointed I was by it. Right, I said. Of course. I reached for the bridle again and she caught my hand. Not hard. Not even for long. Just long enough to stop the movement. My breath stalled. Her fingers closed around my wrist exactly where her knuckles had brushed me earlier, and this time there was no pretending it was accidental. Her hand was rough from work, warm from the day, strong in a way that made me instantly and viscerally aware of being held. Not restrained. Held. She looked at me, and whatever she saw on my face made something flicker in hers. Go eat, she said again. Her voice had changed. Lower. Not colder. More dangerous than cold. For one impossible second, I forgot every practical thing in my life. Job. Town. Gossip. Need. All of it went thin around the edges. All I could think was that she was touching me and not letting go. Then she seemed to realize it too. Her hand left my wrist. Fast enough to feel like a mistake. Slow enough not to be one. I swallowed. Okay. That single word cost me more breath than it should have. She stepped back first. Rebuilt herself first. There is food in the kitchen if Mary left any. Mary, housekeeper. Comes in twice a week. I nodded, as if my body had not just completely betrayed me over a hand on my wrist. When she walked out, the room felt abruptly colder. I stood there staring at the empty doorway for several seconds, then looked down at my own skin. My pulse was still there. Everywhere. I ate lunch alone at the edge of the back porch because I couldn't trust myself to sit inside the house without becoming too aware of every object she might have touched. The sandwich I found in the kitchen had gone a little dry at the edges, but I didn't care. A dog I still hadn't learned the name of wandered over and sat near my boots, hopeful and patient. I gave him half my ham. The outside world kept doing what it always does. A hawk circled over the far pasture. Louis and one of the fence guys shouted something to each other near the gate. A feed truck came and went. By all appearances, it was a completely ordinary afternoon, which made the memory of Rowan's hand around my wrist feel almost unreal. Almost. Not entirely. I finished eating and went back to work. For an hour or two, I managed better. Distance helped. Tasks helped. Then the sky shifted. Clouds moved in faster than seemed possible over open land, flattening the afternoon light and dragging shadow across the paddocks. By 3, the wind had picked up enough to rattle the barn doors. One of the younger horses on the west side started getting skittish. Another kept pacing in his stall. Weather always reaches animals before it reaches people. I was learning that already. I was carrying folded saddle blankets when I heard Rowan call my name from outside. Not loud. Just clear. I stepped into the aisle and saw her by the open barn doors, looking up at the sky. Storm? I asked. Passing through, she said. But it'll spook the younger ones. Thunder rolled somewhere far enough off to still sound thoughtful instead of threatening. She looked back at me. You any good with nervous horses? No, honest. I said I liked honesty. Her gaze held mine a beat. Then she gestured toward Tempest's stall. "Bring me the grooming box." I hesitated. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You can carry a box without falling in love with the horse." Heat rose under my skin so fast, it felt like being caught at something I hadn't even admitted to myself. I hoped my face didn't show it. "What makes you think I was worried about the horse?" I asked. There. A dangerous sentence. Small. Playful on the surface. Not playful underneath. Thunder sounded again, closer now. Rowan's mouth parted like she might answer. Then she didn't. She only looked at me, really looked, and the stillness that settled between us felt heavier than the coming rain. "Box, Ruby," she said at last. I brought the grooming box. Tempest was restless now, not wild, but alert in that tightly coiled way that made his size feel newly significant. Rowan stepped into the stall and took the brush from the box while I stood just outside the half door, not entering, not retreating. The light had gone strange, the kind before a storm where everything turns more vivid and less certain at once. Dust moved in the air. Wind pushed through the cracks in the boards. Tempest stamped once, then tossed his head. Rowan murmured something low to him. I couldn't hear the words. I watched the effect instead. The horse settled by degrees under her hand. It did something to me, seeing that. Not just because she was beautiful in motion, though she was. There was no use lying to myself anymore. It wasn't only the line of her body, or the surety in the way she moved. It was the trust. The authority without force. The fact that something large enough to cause damage chose calm for her. Maybe that was the moment the shift became undeniable. Not that I wanted her. I think some part of me had already started heading that way. No, the real shift was that I realized wanting her could become a problem large enough to rearrange me. The awareness came in hard and quiet. I'm in trouble. I looked away first. Toward the aisle. Toward the weather. Toward anything but her. "You ever going to teach anyone else to handle him?" I asked, mostly to break the feeling. "Maybe. Why not yet?" She ran the brush down Tempest's shoulder once before answering. "Because people rush what they want to touch." That sentence went through me like heat. I didn't breathe right for a second. Did she know what she was saying? Did she mean it that way? Was I making danger out of ordinary words because my body had already made up its mind? The storm wind shoved harder against the barn, and one of the doors banged once before settling back. Rowan finally looked at me. And because he knows when someone's pretending not to be afraid. I folded my arms. "Are we still talking about the horse?" A pulse beat in my throat. Her eyes dropped there for the briefest moment, then back to my face. "No," she said. Nothing happened after that. And somehow that was worse. No touch. No smile. No crossing. Just the truth between us at last, small and bare and impossible to put back where it had been. Thunder cracked closer, and Tempest shifted again. Rowan turned back to him. The wind ended on the surface, but not inside me. Inside me it was still happening, widening, changing shape, taking up room I could no longer pretend belonged to anything else. The rain came hard and sudden 10 minutes later. By then I was in the tack room pretending to sort straps by size while my mind replayed one word over and over. No. Not a rejection. An answer. "Are we still talking about the horse?" No. I should have been more afraid than I was. I was afraid, yes. But not in the clean, practical way I understood. This fear had heat in it. This fear leaned forward. By evening, the storm had moved east. The ranch dripped quietly under a bruised sky. Work slowed. The men left in trucks, one by one. The dog vanished. The air smelled like wet earth and iron and soaked wood. I helped Louise stack 2 feed bags inside the storage room, and then found myself alone again under the overhang outside the barn, listening to water fall from the roof in steady intervals. I thought she'd gone to the house. Then I felt her beside me before I fully registered her there. Rowan stood with both hands in her back pockets, looking out toward the pasture where the light was fading behind the clouds. Neither of us spoke at first. The outside world kept moving in its own distant way. Tires on gravel near the main road. Frogs waking up by the pond. Water pattering from the gutter to the mud below. That ordinary continuation of things made the silence between us feel even sharper. Finally she said, "Storms make Tempest restless. Do they make you restless too?" Her head turned slightly. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on the field because looking felt dangerous now in a way it hadn't that morning. Sometimes, she said. The honesty of it undid me a little. Just a little. I let out a breath I hadn't meant to make audible. Good. Good. At least the horse isn't the only one. That got her attention. I felt it before I saw it. When I turned, she was already looking at me, and there was no room left in either of us to pretend we were only speaking as boss and employee. Not there. Not then. Rainwater fell from the roof between us and the yard in silver strands. The air had gone cooler. Damp. The kind of cool that makes you aware of warmth anywhere it gathers. Rowan took one step closer. Not enough to touch. Enough to make my pulse lurch. Ruby, she said, and my name in her mouth sounded steadier than I felt. I waited. Her gaze moved over my face with unbearable restraint, like she was trying very hard not to let it become something else. This ranch is small, she said. This town is smaller. I knew what she meant. I knew before she finished. If you start hearing things I already have, I mean new things. There was a difference. We both knew it. I looked at the muddy yard, then back at her. And if I do... Her jaw tightened once. You ignore them. That work for you? It was the wrong question. Or maybe the truest one. Because she went still in a way that told me the answer before she said anything at all. No. It had not worked for her. Not for 15 years. Not even a little. The realization hurt more than it should have, considering I'd known her barely 2 days. Maybe because pain recognizes itself fast. Maybe because loneliness does too. Her voice, when it came, was quiet enough that the rain nearly took it. It keeps things standing. I looked at her then. At the woman everyone warned about. At the widow who lived alone with a black stallion, and a town's worth of memory hanging off her name like barbed wire. At the careful way she held herself, as if one wrong movement could call every old wound back into the open. And I had one clear, dangerous thought. I don't think anyone has touched her in years. The thought came with heat and grief tangled together so tightly I couldn't separate them. That scared me more than the attraction itself. Because desire was one thing. Tenderness was worse. Tenderness was how people got all the way in. I should have stepped back. I didn't. Neither did she. The distance between us felt altered now. Not gone. Just changed. Charged with recognition. With warning. With something neither of us was yet willing to name out loud. And then, from inside the barn, Tempest struck the stall door once with his hoof. The sound cracked the moment open. Rowan's eyes closed for a brief second, like she hated the timing or loved it or both. When she opened them again, the walls were back. Not fully. Enough. Be here at 5:30 tomorrow, she said. Earlier, we're riding the fence line. My breath caught. She saw it catch. Her gaze held mine just long enough to make me understand she had meant for me to hear the invitation inside the instruction. You said I'm not trained, I managed. You're not. Then why me? Rain tapped hard off the edge of the roof. The world waited. Rowan looked at my mouth once, and then back to my eyes. Because Tempest doesn't mind you, she said. That wasn't the whole truth. I knew it. She knew I knew it. But it was the only truth she was willing to hand me tonight. Then she turned and walked back into the barn, leaving the smell of rain and leather, and something warmer in her wake. I stayed under the overhang long after she disappeared, listening to water fall into the dark. 5:30. Fence line. Ride. My skin still remembered her hand. My mind still held that one impossible answer. No. And standing there alone, while the ranch settled into night around me, I understood that tomorrow would change something. I just didn't know yet whether it would be my balance, my judgment, or the last safe distance left between us. The alarm went off at 5:20. I was already awake. For a few seconds I stayed still under the thin bunkhouse blanket, staring at the ceiling while the sound of wind pressed against the small window. The storm had passed, but the air still carried that restless feeling storms leave behind, like the land itself hadn't fully decided to settle yet. My first thought wasn't work. It was her. Rowan standing under the barn overhang in the rain, her voice low when she said we'd ride the fence line in the morning. 5:30. Ride. The word had lived in my body all night. I swung my legs off the bed and stood. The wooden floor was cold under my boots. Outside, the sky was just starting to lighten along the horizon, that pale gray stretch that sits between night and morning when the world feels quiet enough to confess things. I dressed quickly. Jeans. Work shirt. My hair pulled back again, tighter this time. When I stepped outside, the ranch was still mostly asleep. The storm had washed the dust out of the air. Everything smelled cleaner. Wet grass, soaked dirt, the faint iron scent of rain still clinging to the fences. The barn lights were already on. Of course they were. Rowan didn't strike me as someone who waited for daylight to start living her day. I crossed the yard slowly, my boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster tried out a half-hearted crow. The sound echoed strangely across the pasture. When I reached the barn doors, she was already inside, saddling Tempest. The stallion stood perfectly still while she worked, head lowered slightly as she adjusted the cinch strap. The barn light caught the dark shine of his coat and turned it almost blue. Rowan's movements were quiet and practiced, every motion deliberate. She didn't look up right away. "You're early again," she said. "You asked for 5:30. You're still early. I didn't sleep much." She glanced at me then. Only a second. But something in that look landed deeper than it should have. "Storms do that," she said. I stepped closer to the tack stand where another saddle waited. "That mine, if you're planning on coming with me?" The words sounded casual. They weren't. I ran my hand over the leather. "You trusting me with a horse already?" "No." She tightened the last strap and stepped away from Tempest. "I'm trusting the horse." I almost laughed. "What if he doesn't trust me? Then you'll find out quickly." Tempest turned his head slightly, watching me with one dark, thoughtful eye. I walked slowly around him toward the other saddle. "You going to give me instructions," I said, "or just watch me embarrass myself?" Rowan leaned one hip against the stall frame. "Mount, that's it. That's it." I took the saddle and moved toward the mare she'd chosen for me, a calm-looking sorrel with patient eyes. My muscles remembered enough of riding to get the tack in place without too much fumbling. When I swung into the saddle, the leather creaked softly under my weight. The horse shifted once. Rowan's voice came from behind me. "Relax your shoulders." I hadn't realized I'd tightened them. "Like this?" I asked. "Less stiff." She stepped closer. Too close. Her hand came to the small of my back, pressing lightly. My breath caught before I could stop it. "Straighten here," she said. Her palm moved up my spine. Not slowly. Not intentionally slow. Just long enough for my body to register it. Heat. Pulse. Something tightening under my ribs. My reaction happened faster than my mind could shape a thought. She must have felt it because her hand stilled for half a second. Then withdrew. "Better," she said quietly. I nodded even though she couldn't see my face clearly. "Too close." The phrase slid through my head again. Not as a warning. More like recognition. We rode out just as the sun began lifting above the far hills. The land around the ranch opened wide once you cleared the last fence line. Wet grass shimmered under the morning light. The storm clouds were breaking apart, long gray ribbons drifting across the sky while the sun pushed gold through their edges. Rowan rode ahead at first. Tempest moved under her like they shared the same balance, the same breathing rhythm. Watching her ride did something strange to my chest. She looked completely different in the saddle, less guarded, more fluid, like something in her body relaxed when the ground fell away beneath her. We followed the fence line for nearly 20 minutes without speaking. The world moved around us in quiet ways. Wind brushing the grass. A hawk lifting off a post as we passed. Water dripping slowly from the barbed wire where the storm had washed over it. Normal things. But every few seconds I felt Rowan's presence beside me, even when she was several yards ahead. Awareness travels faster than distance. Eventually, she slowed Tempest and waited for me to catch up. "You ride better than you said." I said I wouldn't fall off. That's not the same thing. Low expectations help. She looked at me then. The morning sun caught her face fully for the first time, and something about that moment shifted. It wasn't dramatic. No thunder. No confession. Just a look that lasted a fraction longer than normal conversation required. A look that made my stomach tighten. We kept riding. Silence had changed. The first fence break came near the far end of the pasture. One of the posts had leaned sideways after the storm, pulling the wire low enough that cattle might push through if they wanted. Rowan dismounted first. "Hold the horses," she said. I slid down beside her and took both reins while she examined the post. She worked quickly, resetting the wood and tightening the wire with a small metal tool from her pocket. The wind had picked up again. Loose strands of her hair moved across her cheek. Without thinking, I reached out. Hold still. She froze. My fingers brushed the side of her face as I tucked the hair back behind her ear. The moment stretched instantly. Neither of us moved. My hand was still touching her. Barely. But enough. My pulse surged. Rowan's breath changed. Just slightly, just enough for me to hear it in the quiet field. That was the moment. The one that shifted everything. Her eyes dropped to my mouth. Not long. Long enough. And something inside me fractured. The careful distance I'd been trying to keep cracked open under the weight of that look. My body reacted before my mind caught up. Heat moving through my chest. My hand still resting against her skin. A dangerous awareness spreading between us like warmth through cold air. For one impossible second, the world felt narrowed to just the two of us standing beside that fence. Then a truck passed on the road far behind us. Dust rising. The outside world reminding us it still existed. Rowan stepped back. Distance returned instantly. But the air didn't settle. It stayed charged. You should get back on the horse, she said. Her voice had dropped. Lower. Rougher. I nodded slowly. But neither of us moved right away. Instead, we stood there in the grass, the storm-clean wind moving between us. And a question formed inside me before I could stop it. Was I about to ruin everything for one touch? I didn't answer it. I couldn't, because the truth was already standing in front of me. Rowan Hale. Widow. Boss. The woman this town had never forgiven. And the woman my body had already started wanting. Wanting her meant risk. Not abstract risk. Real ones. Losing the job. Becoming the next story Dry Creek passed around in the diner. Dragging her back into the kind of gossip she'd spent 15 years surviving. I knew all of that. Every piece of it. And somehow none of it made stepping away feel easier. Rowan finally turned back to the fence post. We're done here, she said. But her voice carried something new now. Something that hadn't been there yesterday. Restraint. Deliberate restraint. We mounted again. This time she rode beside me instead of ahead. Our horses moved slowly along the pasture line while the sun climbed higher behind us. Neither of us spoke for several minutes, but silence wasn't neutral anymore. It was full, alive with things we hadn't said. At one point our horses drifted closer together. My knee brushed against her boot. The contact lasted only a second, still enough to make my breath catch again. Rowan adjusted her reins slightly, not moving away, not moving closer. Just holding that narrow space between us. And I realized something then. Something quiet. Something that changed the way I saw myself sitting there beside her. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was choosing to stay, even knowing exactly what it meant. The fence line ended near a low ridge overlooking the ranch. Rowan slowed Tempest and stopped. From that hill we could see everything. The barn. The house. The fields stretching outward in long green bands under the clearing sky. Dry Creek itself barely visible in the distance. A town small enough to hold a lifetime of stories. Rowan looked out over it without speaking. Then she said quietly, "This place watches everything." I knew she meant the town. "The ranch?" I asked. "The town." She glanced at me. People talk, I noticed, and they never forget. The wind moved across the ridge. My chest tightened slightly. "Are you warning me?" I asked. Yes. That single word landed heavier than anything else she'd said all morning. A warning, not a rejection. That difference mattered more than it should have. We sat there another minute in the quiet. Then Rowan nudged Tempest forward again. "Come on," she said. We turned back toward the ranch, but the ride down the hill felt different from the ride up, because something had already changed. Something irreversible. The distance between us still existed, but now it carried knowledge. Recognition. An attention neither of us could pretend not to feel anymore. By the time the barn came back into view, my pulse had finally settled. But the fracture inside me hadn't. And as Rowan rode ahead through the gate, I understood something that should have frightened me more than it did. Whatever this was between us, it had already begun. By the time we rode back to the barn, I felt split in two. One part of me moved normally. I swung down from the saddle. I loosened the cinch on my mare. I carried the bridle into the tack room and hung it where Rowan told me to. I answered Luis when he asked if the north fence had held after the storm. I even drank water when Rowan handed me a canteen without looking directly at me. That part of me looked fine. Useful. Quiet enough. Still employable. The other part had been left standing out by that fence post with my hand against Rowan's face, and her eyes dropping to my mouth like she had forgotten, for one dangerous second, that the world existed beyond the two of us. That part of me was useless all day. I tried to work through it. Work usually helped. Work had always helped. If my hands were full, my thoughts stayed from wandering too far into places I couldn't afford. But that day, every ordinary thing on the ranch only made her more impossible to ignore. The barn smelled like warm hay again by mid-morning. Sunlight stretched across the aisle in long gold bars. A radio crackled faintly from somewhere near the tool shed. Buckets scraped. Horses shifted. Somewhere outside, a truck pulled up and gravel popped under the tires. The outside world kept moving. That was the insult of it. It kept moving as if nothing had changed. And something had. Not just between us. Inside me. Because now I knew what it felt like when Rowan looked at me and let herself know it too. Even if only for a second. Even if she'd pulled back. Even if the whole thing could still be denied in public, in daylight, with enough straight answers and shut doors and careful distance. My body knew. Knowledge sat under my skin all morning like a fever I couldn't explain without telling the truth. Around 11, Rowan sent me into town with a short list and the ranch truck because one of the feed deliveries had been delayed and she needed supplies before evening. It was the first time she'd trusted me with anything that felt like more than chores. I stood in the kitchen while she wrote the list on the back of an old invoice, her hair loose over one shoulder again, sunlight hitting the table hard enough to turn the pencil in her hand silver. Grain supplement, she said, writing as she spoke. Liniment. The copper nails if Mercer's hardware still has the right size. And pick up the medicine for Mrs. Harlan. It'll already be waiting at the pharmacy. I stared at her. Mrs. Harlan? She's 82. Her son's in Tulsa this week. She can't drive. The answer came like it was obvious. Like of course Rowan Hale did errands for 82-year-old women. I leaned against the kitchen doorway and folded my arms. You always deliver medicine for half the town? She kept writing. Not half. How many? Enough. That was Rowan. Even kindness came out of her sounding like practicality. She tore the paper free and handed it to me. Our fingers didn't touch. I noticed anyway. Take my truck, she said. The blue one. Don't let Mercer talk you into any extra hardware he can't get rid of. I smiled despite myself. So you do know how people work. She looked up then, and there it was again, that unbearable steadiness in her eyes. Better than they know how I work. The words landed more heavily than she probably intended. Or maybe she intended them exactly that way. I took the list and keys. Anything else? Yes. I waited. She held my gaze another second. Ignore whatever the town wants from you. I should have made a joke out of that. Something light. Something to soften the fact that we were both standing there aware of a line we had already stepped too close to. Instead I asked, what if they just want to talk? Then they want more than talk. Her voice had gone quiet. Not cold. Tired. The kind of tired that comes from having been looked at too long by too many people who think they're entitled to your life. I nodded once. Got it. But I didn't. Not fully. Not until town showed me. Dry Creek looked even smaller in daylight after spending 2 mornings on the ranch. The church sat white and clean in the center, like it had earned the right to judge everything built around it. The diner's parking lot was half full. A woman in a flowered blouse was arranging pumpkins outside the little grocery, as if the whole place existed inside a calendar somebody else had designed. I parked Rowan's truck in front of Mercer's hardware first. That turned out to be a mistake. Not because Mercer tried to sell me the wrong nails, though he did, but because the second he saw whose truck I'd climbed out of, his eyebrows went up just enough to tell me the news had already traveled. Well, he said, leaning one hand on the counter. Looks like Rowan found herself somebody willing to stay longer than 2 days. I am just here for nails. He went to the shelves in the back, came back with 3 sizes I hadn't asked for, spent the next minute pretending not to study me while studying me openly. How's the ranch? He asked. Big. That got the tiniest huff of laughter out of him. And Rowan? There it was. I should have ignored it. Maybe I almost did. But I was still carrying the memory of her saying better than they know how I work. I was still carrying the sight of her delivering instructions for an old woman's medicine. Like it was no more remarkable than asking for feed. And I was tired. Tired in that specific way that makes pettiness feel less tolerable than usual. "What about her?" I asked. He shrugged. "Some folks say she keeps to herself. Some say she's difficult. Some folks ever try minding their own business." His smile thinned. "Just making conversation." "No," I said, taking the correct nails from the counter. "You're not." The air between us cooled by a degree. Mercer wrapped the nails in brown paper and slid them over. "People around here like to know who they're dealing with." I took out the cash Rowan had given me. "Then they should probably start by being honest about themselves." He looked at me more directly then, maybe deciding whether I was worth the effort of disliking. "You new girls always think you see things clearly, maybe because it's easier from outside." That ended it. At least out loud. He rang me up without another word, but I could feel the conversation leaving the store before I did. That was the way towns like Dry Creek worked. Nothing stayed in one place for long if it could become more useful somewhere else. Pharmacy was worse only because the woman behind the counter looked embarrassed on behalf of the whole town. "Medicine for Mrs. Harlan?" I asked. She checked the bag, lowered her voice, and said, "Rowan's still doing that? Doing what?" "Helping." I took the paper sack from her hand. "Why does everyone say normal things like they're surprising when she does them?" The woman blinked. "I didn't mean..." "Yes, you did. I wasn't trying to be rude. I just didn't know how to hear that tone anymore without wanting to break something." She looked down at the counter. "She's just not what people expected." I laughed softly, but there was nothing amused in it. Maybe people expected the wrong thing. By the time I left town, my chest was full of a hard, mean clarity I hadn't gone in with. They had decided who Rowan was years ago. And once a whole town decides a woman is dangerous, they start treating every decent thing she does like an exception instead of evidence. I drove out to Mrs. Harlan's place with the medicine on the seat beside me, and a bag of feed supplements rattling in back. Her house sat small and wind-worn at the edge of a dirt lane lined with dying sunflowers. When I knocked, she opened the door slowly, one hand braced on the frame. "Oh," she said. "You're not Rowan. No, I work for her." A little smile touched her mouth. Then she finally hired somebody with good posture. I laughed before I could stop myself. "She sent your medicine." "I know she did." Mrs. Harlan held the bag to her chest with both hands. "That girl never forgets." Girl. Rowan was 36, all sun-warmed strength and command. But the older woman said it with such old affection that the word didn't sound diminishing. It sounded like memory. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Mrs. Pell." Harlan looked at me like she already knew what kind of question it would be. "You can. Why does the town talk about her the way it does?" The old woman sighed and stepped back enough to let me in from the wind. Her house smelled like peppermint and old books, and the kind of clean that comes from doing everything yourself for too long. "Because people are cowards when they're given permission to be," she said. "And because church folk can turn fear into righteousness faster than most." I stood there with Rowan's truck keys in one hand and felt something in me settle. "She's good to everybody," Mrs. Harlan continued. "Always has been. Fixed my porch after Ethan died. Paid for my roof patch last winter and didn't tell a soul. Brings groceries to the bakers when their checks run late. Hired a boy fresh out of county trouble because no one else would. But some people can watch a woman do 100 decent things and still judge her by the one thing that makes them uncomfortable." I swallowed. "Did she really? Back then, I mean, kiss a girl?" Mrs. Harlan's eyes sharpened with a tired kind of amusement. "Yes." "And?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Mrs. Harlan lowered herself into the chair by the window and shook her head slowly. She liked girls before she married. She liked girls after she married too, I expect, because that doesn't turn off on command. Ethan knew what kind of woman he married. He wasn't blind, and he wasn't cruel. They made a life that worked for them. That should have been the end of everybody else's concern. The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because I was shocked. Because I was relieved. Rowan had not been some rumor that happened to be true. She had simply been herself, and the town had built a punishment around it. "Mrs. Pease." Harlan must have seen something move across my face because she added, softer now, "People always want there to be a hidden ugliness in a woman like Rowan. Makes them feel better about the things they say. But there isn't." She's just strong enough not to beg for their approval. When I left that house, I carried more than the empty pharmacy bag back to the truck. I carried a strange mix of anger and tenderness, and something sharper than either one. Pride, maybe. Not mine. The kind that rises in you when someone else has been treated unfairly for so long that even hearing the truth feels like putting a bone back where it belongs. I got back to the ranch late enough that the sun had shifted hard west. The yard was full of movement. One of the neighbor kids Rowan hired part-time was unloading sacks near the feed room. Louis was arguing cheerfully with another ranch hand over a bent hinge. A man I didn't know sat on the porch steps drinking water with his ankle wrapped. And Rowan, of course, was in the middle of all of it. She moved from one thing to the next without stopping. Checked the hinge. Sent the boy to the west shed for a wrench. Came up the porch steps to ask the man with the wrapped ankle whether he could drive home or needed someone to do it for him. She listened fully every time someone spoke to her. No wasted pity. No unnecessary softness. Just competence and care in the same breath. She looked beautiful in the late light. There was no point lying to myself about that anymore. Not soft pretty. Not polished. Beautiful the way some landscapes are beautiful when they've been shaped by weather instead of decoration. Her hair had come loose almost completely, long and pale gold where the sun caught it, falling over one shoulder and down her back. Her body looked built by work rather than by anyone's idea of display. Strong thighs under worn denim, broad shoulders, forearms cut with the kind of definition that only comes from using them every day. There was dust at one knee and a streak of grease near her wrist. She was absurdly, unfairly gorgeous. And everybody in town should have had the decency to leave her alone. She looked up when she heard my boots on the gravel. For 1 second, all the noise around us thinned. Not disappeared. Thinned. "You got everything?" she asked. I held up the bag from the hardware store and the paper from the pharmacy. "And Mrs. Harlan says you still owe her a porch rail." That made the smallest smile pull at the corner of her mouth. "I fixed that rail 2 winters ago. Apparently she wants a newer one. She always does." The boy by the feed room called Rowan's name, and she turned away to answer him. Just like that. Back into the rhythm of being needed. But I had seen enough in town now that watching her move through her own place made something click into focus. This was the woman they called difficult. This was the woman they treated like a cautionary tale. The one carrying half the town without ever asking for credit. The unfairness of it lodged under my breastbone and stayed there all afternoon. Near sunset, after the trucks had pulled out and Louis had gone home, I found Rowan in the feed room checking inventory by the light of a hanging bulb. The door was half open. Dust floated golden in the air around her. "I talked to Mrs. Harlan," I said. She didn't look up immediately. That usually happens when someone delivers medicine. "She likes you." That got her attention. She turned slowly, pencil in hand, eyes narrowing just enough to tell me she was deciding whether this was heading somewhere she wanted to go. "She likes everybody," Rowan said. "Not like that, Ruby." It wasn't a warning yet. Just my name low and controlled. I stepped into the room anyway. "She said you fixed her porch, paid for her roof, bring groceries to the baker's. Hired that kid, nobody else would." Rowan set the pencil down on the shelf beside the ledger. "People talk too much. Maybe the wrong people do." She exhaled once through her nose. Not quite impatience. More like she was tired of standing in the shape of a conversation she'd already survived before I arrived. "I don't need defending. I know." "Do you?" The question landed harder than it should have. I looked at her. "I know you don't need it. That doesn't mean you don't deserve it." For a second nothing moved except the dust and the single strip of light by the door. Then Rowan looked away. That was rare enough to hurt me a little. Not because I thought I'd won something. Because I could see the effort it cost her not to let that sentence matter. "I don't do those things for praise," she said. "I know. Or redemption. I know that too." Her jaw tightened. "Then why are we talking about it?" "Because I'd spent a whole afternoon watching people say her name like a stain while she quietly held up more of their lives than they would ever admit. Because I needed her to know I saw it. Because seeing her clearly had become a problem I could no longer keep contained in practical places. I took one more step into the feed room. Because I'm tired of hearing them talk about you like they know you." That did it. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But something in Rowan's face shifted. One of those deep internal changes that shows almost nowhere except the eyes. "You don't know me either," she said. The word should have pushed me back. Instead, they pulled something honest out of me. Maybe not, I said quietly. But I know enough to tell when a whole town's been lying to itself. Her breath changed. Just slightly. The same way it had out by the fence when my hand touched her face. The same way it had in the rain when I asked if the horse was the only restless one. Outside, the world kept going. 8 creaked somewhere. One of the dogs barked once, then stopped. Wind moved along the side of the barn and found the loose tin again. Inside that feed room, it felt like the air had thickened. Rowan looked at me for a very long second. Then she said, "Quieter now. You should stop defending me in town." "Why?" "Because they'll turn that into something else too." My chest tightened. "And if they do," her gaze stayed on mine, "then you become part of the story." That was the risk, laid plain. Not abstract. Not romantic. Real. The kind that lives in lowered voices, lost jobs, cold stares in public, people deciding who you are before you get to open your mouth. I knew it. I knew all of it. And the worst part was that hearing her say it did not make me want to run. It made me want to step closer. Which was exactly what I did. Not enough to touch. Enough that the distance between us started feeling honest instead of performative. "Maybe I already am," I said. Something flickered through her face then. Something close to frustration, but more frightened than angry. Frightened not of me. Of the road between us. "Ruby." My name again. Lower this time. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Make this harder." The words went through me like heat. Because there it was at last. Not a confession. Not exactly. But a truth with skin on it. This. I stared at her. "Harder for who?" She laughed once, barely, and there was no humor in it. "You really do ask every dangerous question?" "Yes. And never at the right time?" "There isn't a right time." That silence between us came back again. One of those charged, still moments where nothing physically happens and everything changes anyway. I could hear the bulb humming faintly above us. Could see the dust settling on the edge of the ledger where she'd set the pencil down. Could feel my own pulse in my throat. Then Rowan leaned back against the shelf behind her and looked at me with a kind of tired honesty I hadn't seen full on before. "I have always liked women," she said. No apology. No shame. No softening. Just the truth. The room tilted slightly. Not because I hadn't guessed. Not because town gossip had been wrong about that part. But because hearing her say it in her own voice stripped the story of all the dirt Dry Creek had dragged over it. She wasn't a scandal. She was a woman. A woman who had always known what she wanted and had been punished for refusing to lie convincingly enough about it. "It should never have been anyone's problem," she continued. "I still on mine. But people here like their sins arranged neatly. They know what to do with a man who drinks too much, a husband who strays, a boy who gets in trouble. They can fold all that back into the world and call it human. A woman like me?" Her mouth tightened faintly. "That they turn into a warning." My heart hurt. That was the simplest way to put it. It hurt to hear how clearly she understood the machinery of her own mistreatment. Hurt worse because she wasn't bitter in the sloppy way some people become. She was precise. She had studied the knife enough to name every part of it. "You shouldn't have had to survive that," I said. Something moved in her face. Something that looked almost like softness, until I realized it was grief held very, very still. "No," she said. "But I did. I don't know what exactly made me do it then. Maybe the way she said it. Maybe the light. Maybe the simple fact that once a woman tells you the truth in that tone, walking away starts feeling like cowardice." I reached for her hand. Slowly. Enough time for her to stop me. She didn't. My fingers slid over hers where they rested against the shelf, rough skin against rough skin, and even that small contact felt enormous. Not because it was our first deliberate touch that wasn't accidental or corrective, because it happened in full knowledge. Her hand tensed once under mine, then turned. Not away. Toward. Our palms met properly. Warm. Collused. Steady. My body reacted so fast I almost hated it. Heat low in my stomach. Breath going shallow. The sudden awareness that if someone walked past the half-open door right then, if someone looked in, if one pair of eyes from town happened to land on us like this, it would be enough. Not proof of everything. Not to reasonable people. But Dry Creek did not need reason. It only needed fuel. That knowledge should have made me let go. Instead, it made the moment feel even more alive. Rowan looked at our hands once, then back to my face. "Ruby," she said softly, "you don't understand what they'll do with this." I swallowed. "Then help me understand." Her thumb moved once against my palm. That tiny motion nearly undid me. "They won't just talk about me," she said. "They'll talk about you. They'll make you foolish or dirty or lost. They'll say I used my position. They'll say you were asking for it. They'll make a whole story out of whatever they need to sleep better." Every word was true. Every word hit like a door being bolted. And still I stood there holding her hand. The internal fracture in me had already happened. The one between self-preservation and desire. Between the life I knew how to survive and the one part of me that had started leaning toward Rowan like a plant toward light. Now something else split too. Pity and wanting. I had felt sorry for what they did to her. Now I knew that was too small, too safe a feeling. What I felt was bigger and more dangerous because it asked something of me. Stay. I could hear the question inside myself without having to phrase it fully. Stay, even knowing the cost. I squeezed her hand once, then let them be ugly. Her eyes closed. Just for a second. When they opened again, there was so much restraint in them it looked painful. "You make things sound simple," she said. "They aren't simple, no." Her gaze moved over my face slowly, almost unwillingly. "They're not." And then, because apparently I no longer knew how to stop when the edge was right there, I asked, "Did Ethan know?" A dangerous question. A too personal question. The kind only someone already halfway inside another person's loneliness gets to ask. Rowan went very still. I almost took it back. Then she answered, "Yes." The word came quiet and clean. "He knew before we married. He knew on the day we married. He knew after." "Why did he marry you?" Her mouth shifted faintly, the ghost of something complicated. "Not happiness. Not regret exactly either. Because he was kind," she said. "Because he needed someone who understood silence. Because we were good to each other. That's more than a lot of marriages get." The answer broke my heart a little in a way I hadn't expected. Not out of jealousy. That would have been ridiculous. Because it made Rowan's whole life feel even more real. Less rumor, more history. She had not lived some hidden melodrama. She had built a life the best way she could in a place that demanded costume from her, and she had still found ways to be honest where it counted. "Did you love him?" I asked. "Yes," she said. Then after a beat, "Just not the way this town thinks love should look." The feed room felt too small suddenly. Too close. I looked at her hand still held in mine and had the strangest, clearest thought. This is the first true thing I've touched in a long time. Maybe that was why I couldn't let go. Outside, the wind shifted. Footsteps sounded somewhere beyond the barn, then faded. Someone calling to someone else near the corrals. The world continuing, reminding us again that privacy was fragile here. Rowan heard it too. Her eyes flicked toward the door. Then back to me. "We can't stand here like this," she said. No. But she still didn't pull her hand away. That one contradiction gave me more courage than it should have. I stepped closer. Close enough that I could see the gold in her hair where the late light caught it. Close enough that the smell of hay and sun and clean soap and leather became one thing. Close enough to see the tiny scar near her eyebrow and the faint shadows under her eyes from too many years of waking. Before dawn with no one to help her carry the day. And because her face was right there, because the whole world had narrowed, because the truth in her voice had made wanting her feel less like fantasy and more like gravity, I lifted my free hand and touched her cheek again. Slower this time. Not accidental. Not brief. Her skin was warm from the day. Rowan inhaled sharply. My body answered before my thoughts did. Every inch of me went alert, tender, terrified. "Tell me to stop," I whispered. That was the moral edge of it. The last decent line still visible between us. Boss and employee. Older and younger. Town and exile. Her history. My future. All of it standing in that one sentence. "Tell me to stop." Rowan's eyes searched mine with a kind of intensity that made me feel seen all the way through. Not assessed. Not managed. Seen. "If I ask you to stop," she said, voice barely above breath, "will you?" I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was dangerous. Because the truth was no. And because lying to her in a moment like that felt uglier than admitting what I'd already become. I shook my head once. Something in her broke then. Not violently. Quietly. The way ice goes when the thaw has been underneath it for days. Her hand left the shelf and came up to my waist. Warm. Firm. Careful even in surrender. Then she kissed me. No warning. No performance. No tentative brush meant to be denied later. A real kiss. Slow at first, like she was still asking in the language of touch whether she was allowed. Then deeper when I leaned in. When my hand slid into her hair, when the whole world outside that feed room went soundless under the rush of blood in my ears. I had been kissed before. By boys in high school who thought speed meant confidence. By one girl at a truck stop bar in New Mexico who'd smelled like cheap perfume and wanted to forget somebody else. None of that had anything to do with this. This felt like recognition. Like my body had been waiting on a door I hadn't known existed, and Rowan had just opened it with one hand. Heat moved through me so fast my knees nearly gave. She felt it. Her hold on my waist tightened instantly, not possessive, not trapping, just steadying me. Holding me up through the force of what she had started, and I had wanted too much to pretend otherwise. When she finally pulled back, it was only far enough for breath. Her forehead hovered near mine. I could feel the shape of her exhale on my mouth. Neither of us spoke. For 5, maybe 10 whole seconds, the plot of the world stopped. No new event. No solution. Just breath and warmth and the unbearable fact of us standing there after crossing something that would not uncross. Then Rowan whispered, almost like she hated the truth of it. This was a mistake. Too close. There it was again in another form. The thematic spine of us. Not because the kiss had been wrong. Because it had been right enough to threaten every practical structure around it. I should have stepped back then. Should have agreed. Should have put space between us before need turned into momentum. Instead, I kissed her again. And this time Rowan made a sound low in her throat that went straight through me. The second kiss was hungrier. Not reckless. Just stripped of denial. All those careful walls in her finally opening under my mouth. Her hands, the slide of my body closer against hers. She turned us once without breaking the kiss, and suddenly my back found the feed room wall, wood solid between my shoulders, Rowan standing between me and the last stable thing I'd known an hour earlier. Her hand moved from my waist to my jaw, thumb brushing once under my cheekbone, with a tenderness so at odds with the town's version of her that I wanted to cry and drag every gossiping bastard in Dry Creek into the room to make them witness what they had done by refusing to see air clearly. When the kiss broke again, my lips felt warm and swollen, my chest too tight for proper air. Rowan looked wrecked. Beautifully, honestly wrecked. Her long blonde hair had fallen fully loose now, over one shoulder. There was color high in her cheeks. Her mouth parted slightly like she was still catching up to herself. She looked younger and older at once, young in desire, old in caution. "We can't," she started. A truck door slammed outside. We both froze. Reality came back hard. The barn. The open door. The hour. The ranch hands who might still be somewhere within earshot. Rowan stepped away first. Not far. Far enough to survive being seen. I pushed off the wall slowly, my whole body still lit from the inside. No one came in. No one called out. But the risk had entered the room properly now. Not theoretical. Not future tense. Present. Breathing. Rowan dragged a hand through her hair and looked toward the doorway before she looked at me again. "Tonight," she said. My pulse jumped. "Tonight what?" She hesitated just long enough to tell me she was deciding whether to save us or surrender us. Then she said, "After everyone's gone. North barn door." That was all. No flourish. No romance. Just a place and a time shaped by caution and want. I nodded because speech had become unreliable. She picked up the ledger from the shelf, as if that could restore the scene to something ordinary, and moved toward the door. Before stepping into the light, she stopped and looked back at me once. The expression in her eyes nearly finished what the kiss had started. Not lust alone. Need. Fear. Relief. All of it. Then she was gone. I stood alone in the feed room long enough for the dust to settle again. Tonight. The word lived in my mouth like a promise and a threat. And the worst part was that, for the first time since I'd driven into Dry Creek, I was no longer afraid of being seen by myself. I was afraid of what I would become once Rowan finally saw all of me back. The ranch went quiet slowly that night. Not all at once. First the trucks left, one by one, tires crunching down the long gravel drive toward the road. Then Louis locked the tool shed and shouted a quick goodnight toward the barn. The dog disappeared somewhere behind the house. The last strip of sunset faded behind the far ridge until the land settled into that deep blue Oklahoma evening, where sound travels farther than it should. I tried to work through the hours between the feed room and nightfall. Tried being the important word. I carried hay bales. I rinsed troughs. I checked the latch on a gate that didn't need checking. My body moved through the motions of a normal evening on the ranch, while my mind kept circling the same place. North Barn Door. Tonight. The words had weight. More than anticipation. More than excitement. They carried consequence. Because the kiss in the feed room had already crossed something inside me that wouldn't go back to the way it had been before. And whatever waited behind that barn door would cross something else entirely. By the time darkness settled over the pastures, the air had cooled enough that my breath almost fogged when I exhaled. The ranch lights had gone off one by one. House. Porch. Tool shed. Only the dim lamp near the tack room remained. I walked slowly across the yard. Not sneaking. But not announcing myself either. The north side of the barn stayed mostly in shadow at night. The moon hadn't fully risen yet, and the wide overhang cast a long black strip across the ground. I could hear horses shifting softly inside their stalls, the steady rhythm of animals settling for the night. Tempest snorted once somewhere in the dark. I stopped just short of the door. For a second I wondered if she would actually come. Maybe the whole thing had been a moment of heat she'd regret by nightfall. Maybe Rowan Hale had spent the last few hours reminding herself exactly what kind of story Dry Creek liked to tell about women like her. Maybe she would choose safety. That would have made sense. It would have been the smart decision. Then the door opened. She stepped out quietly, pulling it closed behind her with one hand. Rowan stood in the half-shadow, moonlight catching the edges of her hair like pale fire. She had changed out of her work shirt into something softer, an old gray sweater that hung loose at the collar. Her hair was completely down now, long and bright against the dark fabric, falling almost to the middle of her back. For a moment neither of us moved. The world felt suspended. The ranch quiet around us. The barn warm with animal breath behind the wood. The whole town of Dry Creek sleeping somewhere beyond the fields, unaware that its favorite roomer was standing alive between two women under the night sky. Rowan broke the stillness first. You came. Her voice was low. Like the night had softened it. You asked me to. That wasn't the full truth. I would have come even if she hadn't. She took a step closer. Close enough now that I could see the faint lines of fatigue around her eyes. The same strength in her shoulders that I'd watched all day as she carried the weight of the ranch like it belonged to her bones. You understand what this means, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. You understand what people will say? Yes. Her gaze searched my face. Not looking for excitement. Looking for doubt. You can still walk away, she said quietly. There was kindness in that. The kind that makes the choice feel heavier, not lighter. I know. The truth hung between us. She gave me an exit. And I stayed. Rowan studied me another moment. Then something in her posture changed. Not the strong ranch owner. Not the careful widow the town watched like a hawk. Just Rowan. A woman who had been holding herself together for years and had finally decided to stop fighting gravity. She reached for me. Slowly. Like she was giving me time to refuse. My body reacted before my thoughts could organize themselves. Warmth spread through my chest. My pulse jumped so hard I felt it in my throat. Every nerve seemed to lean toward her the way grass leans toward sunlight. When her hand touched my waist, the contact felt inevitable. Not rushed. Not reckless. Just right. I stepped closer. The distance disappeared between us like it had never been real. Rowan's other hand came up to my face, her thumb brushing softly along my cheek, in a way that made my breath catch. There was something careful in the way she touched me, like she had waited too long to rush anything now. You're sure? She murmured. I nodded. That was enough. Her mouth found mine again. The kiss wasn't like the one in the feed room. That one had been discovery. This one was surrender. slow heat building between us, deepening with every breath until the rest of the world faded completely. Rowan's hands were warm and steady, moving over my back as if learning the shape of me piece by piece. My fingers slid into her hair, softer than I expected, and the small sound she made against my mouth nearly unraveled my knees. We moved together instinctively. No rush. No clumsy urgency. Just the quiet gravity of two people who had already crossed the emotional distance and were now letting their bodies follow where their hearts had gone first. The barn door creaked softly when Rowan pushed it open behind us. Inside, the air was warmer. Horses shifted in their stalls but didn't stir. The world had narrowed again. Not dangerously this time. Intimately. I don't remember exactly how long we stood there kissing. Time felt different inside that space. What I remember most is the way Rowan's hands never stopped being gentle. Strong, yes. Certain. But gentle in a way that made it impossible to believe the town's version of her ever again. There was no hardness in her. No cruelty. Only warmth. And a hunger that felt like relief after years of restraint. Later, much later, we sat on the rough wooden floor of the tack room, backs resting against the wall, while the quiet breathing of the horses filled the space around us. Rowan's head rested against my shoulder. One of my hands was still tangled loosely in her hair. The moment after intimacy always tells the truth about people. Some rush away from it. Some pretend nothing happened. Rowan stayed. She breathed slowly, calmly, like something inside her had finally settled. After a while, she said softly, "I forgot what this felt like." Her voice carried a fragile honesty that made my chest tighten. What? Being wanted without explanation? I turned slightly to look at her. The moonlight slipping through the slats touched her face just enough for me to see the quiet peace there. "You deserve that," I said. She shook her head gently. "No one deserves anything from the world," she replied. "But it's nice when it happens anyway." Silence returned. Comfortable silence. The kind that only appears when two people stop trying to defend themselves. Outside, a breeze moved across the pasture. The ranch felt different now. Not because anything around us had changed. Because something inside me had. Before Rowan, my life had been survival. Move forward. Find work. Stay safe. Don't get tangled in anything that could collapse. Now, something new had entered the map. Not chaos. Not even risk exactly. Possibility. I looked down at her where she leaned against me. Rowan Hale. The woman Dry Creek treated like a scandal. The woman who spent her days helping half the town whether they admitted it or not. The woman who had loved honestly even when honesty cost her everything. She lifted her head slightly and met my eyes. "What?" she asked. I smiled softly. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It was the quiet realization that I no longer saw myself the way I had before. Before Rowan, I had been drifting. After her, I had chosen something. Chosen her. Chosen the truth of what I felt, even knowing the town outside these walls might try to tear it apart. Maybe that was what courage actually looked like. Not loud. Not heroic. Just two women sitting together in the quiet after finally allowing themselves to stop pretending. Rowan squeezed my hand once. "Too close," she murmured, almost amused. But this time the words sounded different. Not a warning. An acceptance. Too close had become exactly where we belonged. I rested my forehead gently against hers. And for the first time since arriving in Dry Creek, I felt completely certain about something. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do in a small town is refuse to step back. And sometimes the life waiting on the other side of fear is simpler than anyone ever told you. If you've ever stood at the edge of something that scared you and chosen to stay anyway, would you have done the same? Thank you for spending this time with us in Secret Garden Stories. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next whispered story waiting in the dark.